Good afternoon. This is Jack Rogers, Editor-in-Chief of Business Facilities Magazine. I want to welcome everyone to today's Business Facility webinar, the Labor Market Recovery Report. Today's webinar is sponsored by Louisiana Economic Development. At the end of today's webinar presentation, I'll be having a conversation with Louisiana Economic Development Secretary Don Pierson about Louisiana's new business model for equity-driven economic development. It's a very important subject, so I encourage everyone to stay tuned. I also want to take a moment here to let everyone know that Business Facilities Live Exchange event will be in person this year. BF thanks everyone who participated in our successful virtual event last year, but we're all looking forward to getting back together in Tucson, Arizona this fall. Our Live Exchange event will take place on October 26th through the 28th at the Westin La Paloma Resort and Spa in Tucson. For information about registering to attend Live Exchange, please visit our website, businessfacilities.com. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping notes here. You'll see the control panel on your screen. This is where you can submit questions using the question box. Just click on the orange arrow on the left side of your control panel, and that will enable you to enlarge and access the question box and submit your question. You can send in questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll try to answer as many as time permits at the end of the presentation. If at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send a message to us using the question box, and someone on our team will answer you privately. Now I'd like to introduce today's speaker, who's joining us from the great state of Idaho. Josh Wright is the Executive Vice President of Workforce and Economic Development at Emsi, the leading labor market analytics firm. He leads a team whose mission is to help communities prosper with unparalleled workforce data, strategies, and training. Josh is a former journalist who regularly writes and presents on emerging trends in economic development, regional workforce analysis, and corporate location decisions. We've got a very important subject to talk about today. The COVID-19 pandemic has forced everyone to think about how and where we work, and it's accelerated trends that are reshaping workforces in all regions. As the U.S. economy has reopened, businesses in numerous sectors are dealing with a deep and persistent labor shortage. Emsi has defined what it's calling a demographic drought that is poised to transfer the future of the labor market, a future that may see the demand for workers outpace the supply for years or even decades to come. So without further ado, let's welcome our speaker, Josh Wright. And since he's coming to us from Idaho, we'll say good morning, Josh.
Good morning, good afternoon, Jack, and everyone else. Thank you for offering me this opportunity to speak on this important topic. And I am coming to you from the very, very toasty Pacific Northwest, as made national news. We are having an historic heat wave here in the inland Northwest. So it was 106 degrees yesterday. It's cooling down to 104 today. So summer is in full effect here. The labor market is heating up in a serious way. It has been for several months as well. So excited to talk about the labor market, some of the dynamics we're seeing as we look at data trends and go from there. So as Jack said, I am the Executive Vice President of Economic and Workforce Development at Emsi Burning Glass. Emsi just in the last month has merged with Burning Glass Technologies, and excited about the future of our two companies coming together and to provide even more actionable insights on just super important trends about future of work, skills that are in demand, and other kind of just major training and needs and job opportunities to get to unlock opportunity for people in America. And there's a lot of opportunity, obviously, and a lot of businesses are hurting for talent. So we're going to start today talking about just some of the major dynamics we're seeing as we look at the labor shortage, and then unfold what we're seeing from our demographic drought research, as well as some of the more up-to-date trends on wages and remote work that we're seeing as well. And then after that, we can take questions. So let's just jump into the presentation. I'm going to start today off with talking about showing some, if you follow the labor market, you follow what's happening in the job market, you're probably familiar with the JOLTS survey. The Bureau of Labor Statistics produces what's called the Job Openings and Labor Turnover Survey. There's a 2-month lag with this data. The new data through May will be released a week from today on July 7th. So the JOLTS survey comes out, and it always gets a lot of attention, not as much as the job report that shows job numbers and the unemployment rate, but the JOLTS survey still is a very important indicator of what is happening at the establishment, at the employer level, painting a more complete picture of the labor market demand and unmet employment demand in the labor market. So you can see here of the survey that the BLS does of a wide variety of business establishments every month. You can get a sense of, they estimate the number of job openings. You can see the skyrocket, through COVID, you could see the decline in job openings, and now just this, a little bit of spikiness as we started, went through 2020, and then since then, at the end of 2020, and then just it's been an upward trend. At the same time, this is a really telling chart to show that the unemployed workers per job opening, you could see what happened during the Great Recession and how long it took to get to that one worker per opening line, this dotted line across the chart. This was a much shorter cycle given during the COVID recession, and you can see we're not quite down to below that level that we were pre-COVID, but it's getting very, very close. And this is a seasonally adjusted number. This chart, Ben Castleman from the New York Times reports on this every month and does a great job. This chart is to give him the credit there. Now, the JOLTS survey does give a little bit of detail, and as we unpack this further, we're going to get into deeper detail by industry, by occupation, and by region. What the JOLTS survey does is give some high-level major sector analysis, sector data, and then it gives some very high-level geographic detail by region, Northwest, Northeast, that type of a thing. There's other data sets from the BLS and data sets that we'll talk about that Emsi and Burning Glass and others track that give us even more granular detail by region and more up to date in terms of daily activity of what's happening in the job market. But you can see here, the big thing that jumps out to me from the JOLTS survey is from January, you can see January here on, look at the huge growth in leisure and hospitality. The opening of the economy, the increased number of vaccinations, as there's been a huge demand for people getting out there, wanting to travel, hotels, airports are bustling. The leisure and hospitality industry the job opening number is growing like crazy. In the same time, there has been a huge logistical and supply chain challenges, and job openings in trade, transportation, utilities is also increasing, and some other ones have been a little flatter. So as we go to this, though, what we've seen as we've tracked the labor market through COVID and even before, that there is a really nice parallel between what the JOLTS job openings numbers show and the JOLTS survey shows, and what we can see when we track online job posting activity. And what we mean by Emsi's job posting, both active and new postings, is that we are scraping job postings from the internet, from job boards, from company sites, anywhere we can find valid job posting information online, scraping that information and building analytical tools and information off of it. And you can see here that labor demand, the spike in labor demand has also been increasing month over month, both in new job postings, those are the net new postings each month, and active, the ones that are remaining online. And it's good to see these in parallel, because the active postings are showing that there's a harder and harder time for some employers they're keeping postings up longer. They're trying to find people. As we go through this, though, we can also start to look at some geographic dimensions. This is just a very high-level one showing the 50 largest metropolitan statistical areas, or MSAs. In the last 90 days, every single MSA, except for two, have seen major increases, in a lot of cases, major increases in job postings. St. Louis is one of those. You can see here in the middle of the country. Apologies for my mouse there. St. Louis is one of them, where there is been a very slight decline. But the majority of places, and then especially in some hotter tech areas, some hotter places like Nashville and Florida and Texas, where there has been major increases in job postings in the last just 90 days. So we're looking again, we're breaking this down even, we're going to start breaking it down even more day to day, and you'll see here as we go through this. So again, job postings are a good predictor of where the JOLTS survey is coming. And since there's a 2-month lag in JOLTS, MZ has been tracking how can we predict the job opening number from the JOLTS survey. We've done this a couple times and have been pretty much on the mark. And what we do is we use the new job postings that we're looking at, again, the ones that are coming online, all the thousands of employers' websites and job boards we're scraping and saying, can we predict the job opening survey? So our prediction, and we can check back here in a week when the job openings come out from JOLTS, we're predicting about 9.5 million job openings from the JOLTS survey, given the trend of where job postings are coming. You can see there was a major spike in job postings in early part of the year, from February to March. It's a big as the economy reopened. It's starting to settle a little bit, but still overall an upward trend. The JOLTS survey has shown even more of an upward trend, but we are predicting that it's going to be flattening out just a little bit, at least on the openings number. That doesn't mean that there's still a huge amount of demand. That's just purely on the job openings number. As we get, that's just a lay of the land of the labor shortage. Very clearly that there's a lot of unmet demand out there, and we're going to unpack that a little further by looking at the wage picture to see where that is by occupation and by region as well. But let's talk about some demographic trends that we're also seeing. A few months ago, MZ released a research report called the Demographic Report, and the Demographic Drought, and we coined a term called the SANSdemic. Obviously, everyone is familiar with the term pandemic, meaning all people. SANSdemic is without people, or in this case, without enough people. As we look at the demographic trends and really look at great demographic researchers like William Fry from the Brookings Institution and other research that we've corroborated this with, we see some major demographic trends that have been happening well before COVID accelerated some of these things. Number one, the biggest acceleration we saw was the record number of baby boomers leaving the job market in 2020, and we'll get to that here in a second. There's also been declining rates of labor force participation across the board. Specifically, though, we noticed a pretty jarring declining rate of male labor force participation, coupled with a lot of women exiting the workforce, in addition to major things happening, COVID unsettling childcare, the education system, people not being able to go to work for family reasons, lots of things happening there. In addition, the third thing that we've noticed is a historically low birth rates, and we'll get to the fertility rate by state here in a second. And this report is on our website at economicmodeling.com. You can download it. I really recommend it. It's gotten a ton of interest, a ton of coverage in Wall Street Journal, New York Times, other places the last couple of months. Been a helpful resource for workforce development, economic development, and business professionals who are trying to figure out how to inform their talent attraction strategies, their workforce strategies, whether we're working at a company or for a community. Now, we talked about boomers. This is research from the Pew Research Center, and Pew does top-notch, absolutely top-notch research. This is the annual increase in boomer retirements. You can get a sense here, over the last decade or so, there's been about an average of roughly 2 million boomers who've been leaving the labor force. In 2020, the estimate, again, this is actually coming from the current population survey, some micro data from the BLS, that the estimate for 2020 is that there's 3.2 million baby boomers have left. For decades, there's been talk of the silver tsunami, of this huge number of baby boomers, and the fact that once they start leaving the workforce, that there's going to be even more pronounced labor shortages. Obviously, that's been happening in terms of there's been steady set of retirements from boomers, 2020, and we're guessing the early part of 2021 is going to show similar data in terms of just a huge exit of very talented, skilled, experienced people out of the labor market. And that leaves a big hole in mid-level and senior level roles across organizations. Now, we talked about labor force participation in a second. Here's a trend that shows that. This is civilian labor force participation seasonally adjusted. You can see this is just the total labor force participation in May 2021, just the last reported month we have, it was 61.6%. You can see the steady decline of that labor force participation. These are people who are looking for the people who are actually, when we report the unemployment rate, we're estimating how many people are out there actually looking for work or wanting to be actively in the labor force. There's a ton of people on the sidelines. You can see the big decline that happened through COVID. We have seen a spike up, but it's really been pretty flat the last few months. Starting to see a little bit of a pickup, but this is definitely a concern in terms of just the supply of people out there who are willing and ready to work. Now, even the bigger jarring number, as we mentioned, was the prime age male participation. And what we mean here is the people who are the males who are in their young early 20s all the way into the 50s, who are in the kind of the prime of their careers. There has been a plummeted from a real plummeting of still a higher participation, well higher than the national average across all segments, but a pretty big drop here if you look at it, from 94% in 1980 to 89% in 2019. And you can see the bigger drop during COVID, and it's starting to pick up, but this trend will be really important to follow. There's been a lot of research around why have been more males dropping out. Some of this is the opioid epidemics, especially in Ohio, Kentucky, other areas that have seen a huge dropout of men, that type of thing. I'm not going to get into all of those dynamics, but a big indicator here is prime age male labor force participation. In addition to that, there's been the growth of the U.S. population. You can see here by decennial census, by 10-year chunks, you can see there's been growth, but from 2010 to 2020, the growth is slowing. And we'll see where the census numbers, as more and more estimates come out from this last census, but it's definitely indicating a slowing of the U.S. population. Now, there's immigration that is offsetting some of that, but it's not enough to keep up with, again, the retirement of the boomers and the decline of fertility. And we'll get to that here as we talk about a continued recovery. So just to recap quickly what we've talked about, obviously, huge unmet demand, labor shortage. We hear about that in all the different anecdotal and real data that we can see in terms of huge number of job openings, not enough workers to fill them, and now some broader trends of boomers exiting, prime age men, and other factors of slowing demographic trends. Let's talk about how to get a continued recovery here, and really some three things that matter a lot. Obviously, as we see, number of people matter. Now we can talk a lot about automation. What are those trends? More and more employers are going, more and more, especially manufacturers and others, are going to be trying to go toward automation if they can't find people. That's a natural thing. But at the same time, people, the regions that have people, that have a strategy to attract people, to have strategies on or the longer term trends of actual growth of families and of new births, those regions are going to have a better chance of recovering for the long haul. But also wages matter. There's been a lot of debate about wages. We're going to talk about that here in a second, and then just some remote worker trends to finish off as we go to the Q&A. So first, let's talk about just a few more population trends. This again comes from the demographic report. If you look at the working age population by county, this is every county in the contiguous U.S. You can see this is from the first decade of the 2000s, 2001 to 2011. You can see a lot of blue here. Blue means that was growing. That working age population. This isn't employment numbers. These are population demographic numbers among the working age population. That there was a big growth for most counties. There's some red here. You can see it, especially in the Midwest, the upper Midwest. There was some red, some concerning numbers. A little bit in the Gulf Coast region, a little bit in the northeastern region. Some decline in the working age population, but a lot of blue. What's really jarring is then this is the same data for the working age population from 2011 to 2021. This is using Emsi's demographic data from census estimates, and you can get a sense here of just the sheer number of counties that are seeing a decline in their working age population in the last decade. This is pretty startling. You can see this even more pronounced across the Midwest and upper Midwest. You can see it in the West, more in the Western U.S., and especially up and through the Northeast, Pennsylvania, the Great Lakes region, huge amount of red. Now, there are some different, obviously, some regions that are bucking this trend. Parts of Texas, a lot of Florida, and parts of Utah and Nevada, and a little bit of California and Colorado that are bucking this trend. We're up here where we're in Idaho. You can see some of that as well, some of the Pacific Northwest, but really a lot more decline of the working age population by county. And we're happy if you want to see this data for your region, for your counties, for your MSA, happy to share this with you. Important trends to look at to be able to have a baseline as you develop strategies for your region. Or if your business is wondering, where should we be locating? Where are the people going to be? Now, just to reiterate some of what we're seeing from a fertility rate, the birth rate numbers, this is also a pretty startling data from the CDC, the National Vital Statistics Report. If you look in 2003, so total fertility rate fell from an average of 2.04 to 1.77, and that was just in about a 15-year time frame. But look at this by state. In 2003, there were 15 states with a fertility rate above 2 or above 2.1. That's the replacement level that has been estimated for decades about how, given births and deaths, of what the fertility rate would need to be. If you look in 2017, this is well before COVID, the fertility rate was 1.77, and only 2 states, Utah and South Dakota, were above that replacement level. Those were the 2 states in blue there. And I'm sorry, I've got some apologies for my jumpy mouse. But you can see the 2 states there, the 2 blue states, a lot of dark red, darker red in the Northeast and in the West, on the West Coast as well. So as we talk about this, as we transition to the wage picture, I want to just emphasize that the demographic trends are not super positive, obviously, in terms of painting a fairly bleak picture of declining demographic trends. So obviously that makes the move for looking at migration trends, where people are moving, immigration trends, where people are coming from, what the immigration policies, all of that makes it that much more important to be emphasizing and to know what's happening in your region. And so as we look at this, in addition to that, we say, okay, people matter, but we also know even if you have people, there's people who are going to either stay on the sidelines, whether they want to collect unemployment or not, and that's obviously a lot of states are shortening those unemployment benefits or the extension of those, and regardless of that, there's going to be, because of the increased demand for workers, there's going to be an elevated sense of, hey, I can expect more, I can demand more of a higher wage, or I'm just not going to either take a job or I'm going to go take to another career. I can go to another job where I can make more money. So one thing that Emsi tracks is advertised wages in our job posting analytics. Not all job postings, every single job requisition or job ad that an employer puts has a wage. Some of them are ranges. But when we take out the wages from about the 30 to 50% of job postings that do show some wage figure in them, we can get a sense of month over month what's happening. And this is way more up to date than any job wage figures we can get from the BLS. It's not as complete, it's not a full picture, but it gives us a more of a current trend of what's happening at the wage across advertised wages in job postings from what employers are putting in their postings. I should also note, as we look at this, even if an employer advertises a job at a certain wage, they might hire someone at a higher wage, they might hire someone at a lower wage depending on experience. We've all seen those in job postings. So that's another thing to factor in here. But you can see here, the universe of 32 million job postings over the last year, this is from June 2020 to May 2021, we saw a big spike kind of during the heat, as we were coming out of the heat of the real heart of COVID in the fall, coming a big spike into the early part of the year. And then we actually have seen a decline with a little bit of a bounce back in advertised wages. This is across all occupations, all job postings. $47,000 median wage that we're seeing in the job postings for the last year. 10% decrease from when we looked at June 2020 to May 2021. We'll have our June data here in just a couple days. We'll have all the June data that we're processing right now, and we'll be able to get that updated picture. But our guess is that it's going to be increasing a little bit, but you could see this pretty volatile picture here from job postings. Now, really depends on the region and the occupation and the job industry that you're looking at. Big focus on, as people come back online, a lot of restaurants can't find wait staff. And we hear stories of restaurants or even fast food joints who have to close down or maybe temporarily shut down for a little bit because they don't have enough people to show up to work that day. Wages for waiters and waitresses, that occupation across the U.S. have been have actually grown quite a bit. And you can see here a little bit of spikiness, but overall 11% increase over the last year in advertised wages. So if you get a sense, even fast food joints like McDonald's and Burger King are having to bump up their average wages to get or their entry-level wage to get people. Same thing for restaurants, full-service restaurants and wait staff. Same thing happening. We can see even a little more of an upward trend in home and personal care aides. Big focus on healthcare and the aging as the population ages, the more increased need for home health aides. This is that occupation that we track to look at that. Wages are still really low for home health aides. That's largely because there's such a supply of them that there's usually been a big turnover in that occupation. But as you see this, a clear indication for the demand for these workers that those home health aid organizations that are hiring are having to bump up their wages. The median is $33,500. It's a 14% increase over the last year for home health aides. And then cashiers. Cashiers has been a little bit flatter, but still an overall increase, 7% for cashiers. And this could be cashiers across retail trade. So grocery stores, pharmacies, all that kind of stuff. Anyone who is classified as a cashier, this is what when employers are posting their jobs, that the advertised wages for cashier positions have increased by 7%. What we wanted to do is give you a cross-section of occupations to show there are some really interesting wage dynamics. There's other occupations where the wages are declining, and what we recommend is to look at this at your local labor market, or if you're looking at analyzing the wage trends for maybe 5 markets that you're thinking about bringing a business to or expanding into. What are the dynamics of wages there, and what is the skill level of those people that you want to hire, and getting a sense of the real a little more refined compensation review of what you would need as an organization or as a community. How attractive are your workers to, or how competitive are your businesses being for workers? And that's often a conversation we have when we work with economic and workforce development organizations who are using this type of data to go to their business and saying, you need to be upping your wages. Look at what other businesses, maybe do a competitor analysis in your industry to say X competitors offering these types of wages. A couple more data points before I close. When we talk about remote work, this is probably the biggest topic when we talk to economic developers. Many are developing strategies to attract remote workers, or alternatively to keep people in their regions and help them find opportunities to work remotely but stay in their region. Again, people matter, and even if the definitions of economic development bringing jobs and investment to a region, sometimes it's really shifting now to see even if there's a full manufacturing operation that might not be coming to your region, it's still important to attract remote workers who might be working across the world or across the country, but still those people are in your region contributing to your communities. And you can get a sense here of just the huge rise in remote work. This is just one indicator we've been tracking since the start of COVID, and that is how many job postings. Again, we talked a lot about job posting analytics today. How many employers are saying putting in their job posting that people can work remote when they hire? So back before COVID, it was a fairly low percentage overall of job postings. It's still not a huge percentage if you look at the universe of the 12 to 14 million job postings across that are out there online right now. But we've hit about the 1 million threshold of total unique job postings that show people that say, we'll hire you and you can work wherever you want. And that is a big shift in the labor market and creating huge shifts in commercial real estate and economic development and all the rest. And in terms of just generally talent attraction as well. So we expect this to increase in terms of remote job postings. But what's going to be interesting as we look at this is as the state of the economy recovers more and more, what are people's willingness to come back into the office, and how much are different companies going to say, you know what, we really need you back. We want you in with our people. This is a survey from Buffer.com that shows the majority of people really want to spend a lot of the time at least working some of the time remotely. Hybrid models are all the rage right now. And the companies that are giving that flexibility are retaining people probably at a higher rate, because if you're being more forceful about, no, you have to be back in the office, and another person can get a job, say, no, I can actually work remotely, but they're going to opt that way. But I personally think there's going to be a trend to more people, to more companies saying, you know what, I actually get energized by being around people, companies that see more creativity and not necessarily productivity, but creativity and innovation with people being together. And I think there's going to be a leveling off of this huge shift. And it's going to be, some of those are going to have to remain, but I think it's going to level up a little bit. As we've talked about this though, really, one of the groups of the market that's going to see, I think, a continued increase in people and attention is mid-sized MSAs, mid-sized markets across the country. These are actually counties that roll up, obviously counties roll up to metro areas, but this is from our Emsi's Town Attraction Scorecard study from December of 2020. We'll be releasing our 6th annual Town Attraction Scorecard this year. And this is where we track every single county, large, mid-size, and small, on how they're actually doing in workforce and town attraction trends. If you look at this, of the top 100 counties that were 250,000 to 100,000 to a million, that's what we mean by mid-size, 250,000 to a million people, more than half of the top 100 were mid-sized markets. Mid-sized markets make up more than half of the whole top 100. And let me restate that because that was the confusing way to put it. Of all the top 100 counties that we look at for town attraction, the mid-sized markets, 250,000 to a million, are making up more than half of those. That means that a lot of the large urban centers are actually not attracting people. They're growing largely because of immigration or some other things, or they're not growing at all. They're seeing an exodus. And so, meanwhile, mid-sized markets outside of Denver, Spokane, Boise, which is Ada County there, Bend, Oregon, Reno, Nevada, outside the Phoenix area, outside of Houston and Austin, some of those smaller mid-sized metros are seeing really large growth and being very attractive for people who want maybe more space, who can get more bang for their buck in housing, that type of thing. So pre-pandemic, these are data from actually data that predated the pandemic. We were seeing a rise in mid-sized markets, more and more talent flowing to those. And I think, I believe our 2021 report for town attraction will show an even more of an upward trend in mid-sized markets, attracting more talent, especially through COVID. People wanted to get out of some of the big cities, and some of that will stabilize. But mid-sized markets, there's really been this migration trend toward that, and actually that will then bump down to the third-tier markets. Some of the even smaller groups that will become more attractive. So there will be a ripple effect there, in my opinion. So I covered a lot of data, gave a lot of different trends there, but state of the recovery is really being shaped by a lot of the broader long-term demographic trends and shorter-term remote work trends that are impacting every company, every community. Happy to take questions, Jack, but hope that gives kind of a broad sense of really where the labor market is right now.
Well, thank you, Josh. You've given us a ton of information. I'm sure a lot of people looking at these slides, these are eye-opening numbers, and it's interesting how the trends that existed before the pandemic seem to be accelerating. And let's pick up on with our first question here. The slide you showed about the job openings, the postings, the highest percentage of new job postings is in the large urban metros. And since we already, as you showed in the last slides you presented, we already have a migration going on of people from large urban centers to the mid markets. Do you think that this persistent labor shortage in the large urban centers is going to force a lot of companies that are based in the large cities to increase the number of remote workers because they just can't find enough people in the metro or the region to fill the positions?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that some of that is just driven by COVID was such an eye-opener for how to get work done, and people who wanted to say, you know what, I'm not comfortable coming into the office in a large, especially, Boston, New York, LA right now have there's different regions that have a little bit of a different feel than the South, or maybe out here in the West where we've been fairly open for a while. We have big wide open spaces. There's not as much of a core group, a core urban core. I think that's just driving this. I say that because if already a lot of those big financial firms in New York, tech firms in San Francisco are telling people they can work from anywhere, that opens a bag that you can't really, it's hard to reverse that. And that also adds that they can find talent. They can make some of their talent is happier, maybe living in Bozeman, Montana, and you know what, I'm super productive, I can work there. And they also can find, it's a competitive advantage for companies who can find that talent and say, you know what, we have a great offer for you and you can live wherever you want. That's a lot of people are doing that. But if you have the right value proposition as a company, that gives you, it really opens up a talent pool. If you say, versus saying, actually, we have to have you in New York, we have to have you in San Francisco. So I think there is that shift is going to increase to midsize, and I really do think it's going to float down to that smaller markets as well, because mid-sized markets are going to start growing, and there's going to be some crowding there that people think, you know what, I want to go to the smaller cities as well.
Well, you mentioned immigration, and obviously one of the common political memes that we hear is that immigrants migrating to the U.S. are going to take jobs away from Americans. But based on these demographics and with this steadily declining prime age labor force participation rate, do you think that is going to create sort of a countervailing pressure on our approach to immigration? I mean, the basic question is, can we close a long-term labor shortage without increasing immigration?
I don't think we can, and I think it also depends on, how big of increases and leaps can we see in in artificial intelligence, new technologies, new types of automation that can maybe long-term provide some of the solutions. Quick fixes, I don't think there's any quick fix here. Even a huge increase in immigration is, there's going to be there's long-term consequences of what's been happening for decades. So I don't think there are a short-term or necessarily a long-term solution to immigration or automation. At the same time, I do think if there's a desperation for workers and such a severe shortage, and such that U.S. the global competitiveness of the U.S. is at stake, that's at the federal and national level, the dialogue starts to change, and at the regional and state level, those states are trying to compete, regions are trying to compete. There's going to be more pressure on policy to say, you know what, we've got to get as creative as possible, and that includes being more open-minded about immigration. I think that will shift.
Well, it's interesting that before the pandemic, the sort of the conventional wisdom was saying that the big push is for productivity, which is increased by automation. So, we're going to people are going to lose thousands, millions of jobs to automated production. But it seems like we're starting to see companies that, for example, Amazon, with its fulfillment centers, which are major employers, they're starting to call them robotic fulfillment centers, but they're still hiring 1,000 people every time they open one. So the question here is, just as we're seeing the government start to respond on these issues, do you think that the push for productivity, they're going to find a way? I don't know whether it's the cobot scenario where you have workers working with robots, but they're going to find a way to lessen the impact of automation on the number of jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a key term is augmenting labor instead of totally replacing it. That's been happening for decades. If you think in the healthcare industry, there's technology that comes alongside, a CNA or a nurse that helps them be more productive. And that's going to, I think, happen more and more. Augmentation is going to happen more and more, or full scale, whatever it does to make a company competitive, whether that is major capital investment and robotic technology, or just figuring out how do we be more competitive by offering better reskilling and workforce programs, training programs in our companies. The regions like Don in Louisiana and other regions who have been super innovative and competitive on reskilling, upskilling, workforce training are going to be that investment is going to pay off, because it's not just it's about people and companies. Yeah, it's about people, but it's also about aligning them to the skills that are in demand. And one trend that is happening that I haven't hit on is there's the amount of technological technology change in the labor market, in the economy as a whole, is profound. And that means that there's a huge need for continual investment in reskilling and upskilling of individuals at the community level, workforce development, and at the company level. And so that investment, I think, is going to be really, really key. And so the regions that are already investing in that are going to have a huge leg up as well.
Well, we're tracking the changes in the way both companies and economic development organizations recruit and train new workers, and the competition for skilled workers is so intense that we're actually seeing organizations that are training candidates for jobs before they're hired to see if they can hit the ground running. Do you think these kind of efforts are going to increase?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It was happening before COVID. I'd love to get Don's perspective as you talk to him here in a second. I think it's absolutely going to increase. Like we get questions all the time, and we're a data analytics company, but we work with hundreds of economic development groups and states and workforce development groups of what are the cutting edge programs out there that blend that are data informed, data driven, but give a sense of how do we message, how do we communicate to our company that we are that we are a leader in workforce development and training, and that we're going to give you the workers you need right there on the spot, or through very quick, that we can spin those people up. And that's a real change in higher education as well. Higher education has been shifting to be more on demand, be more skills focused, be more micro-credential focused. And that doesn't mean that the Princetons and the University of Michigans and lots of great public-private 4 years they're not going to go away. Liberal arts education is important, but those on-demand training of the real in-demand skills is going to be that much more value.
All right, my last question for you, and then we'll introduce our next speaker. We want to try to, we've hit people with a lot of statistics here, and we're all, as you mentioned at the beginning, we're all reacting to a different kind of drought than a demographic drought. We've got unprecedented heat waves, and half the country doesn't have enough water. So we don't want to throw another drought on top of that. But I'm going to ask you, as you showed the the 9.3 million job openings in April. Now, the country was still beginning to reopen in April, and the vaccines were starting to be distributed. You do anticipate that the next report is going to show that number coming down, don't you?
A number of job openings? Yeah.
The 9.3 million.
Yeah, our prediction, again, so that was, our prediction for the May job openings that JOLTS will show is actually a little bit of an upward trend, but a slowing of the upward trend. So 9.5 million is what we're predicting. And again,
so
our prediction, we're not we think it's going to level off. And that's based off of, because of those online job ads that we track are an early indicator, a predictor of where JOLTS and the job openings go. And so we think it's going to increase, but start to level off.
And let me just squeeze one more question in. You're based on what you're telling us, in the beginning of the pandemic, it looked like the bottom dropped out on the bottom third of the economy, the people that were in lower wage jobs in the hospitality industries, restaurants, etc. But the workforce shortage is at the top end and the bottom end. It's really permeating workforce availability across the board, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's happening at, for high tech jobs. It's happening for warehousing. It's happening for fast food, restaurant industry, retail, trade. I think in general, there hasn't been a sector that's been impacted really. It does change. There's been a lot of talk of the K-shaped recovery, and that's true. But the worker shortage is becoming so pronounced that I don't think any sector is immune to it. I do think this really, though, all labor market data, all labor market the economy is all local. Like politics, economics is local. Labor market dynamics are local. So what could be happening in one industry, a sector that like manufacturing, who has a major unmet demand, and in one sector, it might be more of a driver industry. In another region, that's transportation or logistics or business and finance that's really seeing the big shortage. So that's where honestly, MZ for decades and Burning Glass have come in to provide those local labor market dynamics, because there's such shifts happening locally and up more in real time. That's why the data is important to track that way.
Okay, well, Josh, thank you for packing a ton of information into this presentation. You've all given us a lot to think about here, and I want to thank the audience for their great questions. This webinar will be posted on the businessfacilities.com website. And now it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker. In April of last year, and this was less than a month after the first case of COVID-19 was confirmed in Louisiana, Governor John Bel Edwards created the Resilient Louisiana Commission, which is also known by its acronym RLC. Governor Edwards asked Louisiana Economic Development Secretary Don Pierson to serve as the co-chairman of the RLC, which was given two primary objectives by the governor. The commission was asked to issue industry-specific recommendations for the response to the pandemic as the crisis was unfolding, and it also was given the responsibility of examining the state's economic and societal vulnerabilities and creating a plan to address those vulnerabilities. The comprehensive game plan for a more resilient Louisiana was delivered to Governor Edwards by the RLC in December. This plan embraces an equity-driven model for growth and economic development that prioritizes economic inclusiveness and quality of life, including investments in public health and infrastructure. Don Pierson is here today with us to give us some details on this important new blueprint for equity-driven economic growth in the great state of Louisiana. Good afternoon, Don.
Thank you, Jack, and it's great to be here with you. And wow, what a great presentation by Josh with so much of this data being presented today. It just opens up a whole universe of possibilities that we could continue a number of discussions, but great to talk about.
It's a new world.
how we make a more resilient economy, and certainly the integration, all those workforce elements that he spoke about are a significant part of that. Hey, Jack, the other thing I noticed he said is that people in the 20 to 50 age bracket are in the prime of their careers. I guess you and I are not.
Yes, but he also said that the baby boomers are taking incredible skills and talents with them as they retire.
So I'm looking forward to this. I know that they're going to bring a lot to the table.
So Don, please tell us what some of the most effective industry-specific recommendations that were made by the RLC had the most impact during the pandemic, and also what were the key vulnerabilities that you needed to address with this plan?
And really, there's a lot to unpack there, Jack. And for those that want to do the deeper dive at opportunitylouisiana.com, they can see the Resilient Louisiana Commission node to click on, and can get this whole and report at their leisure. And certainly a great deal of important information that's included in this. But we started with a deep dive into 15 different areas of the economy, everything from financial services, healthcare, rural economic development, construction, food, agriculture, restaurants, energy. We formed 15 task force around these various sectors of the economy, brought together. Thankfully, we have a new tool out there, either WebEx meetings or Zoom. We used Zoom, brought a lot of talent together. It happened during the pandemic, so it turns out that a lot of elected officials, industry leaders, citizens had time available to really focus and participate in this program. But a number of themes emerged, and certainly at the center of this, and you've mentioned it, equity-driven economic development was something that we noted. And it's important to create a place where equity is prioritized and championed. And through this economic inclusion, you actually take the segment of society that's not as productive and change that into a more productive asset. And in that way, you lower the burdens on government and expenses, and you increase the gross domestic product with more productive individuals. This is certainly got some elements integrated into it that require investments in public health and also in public education. But those become building blocks for stronger, more resilient economies.
Okay, we need to advance the slides here. I'm going to ask our marketing assistant, Olivia, to advance them, please. Here we go.
And I'll speak to other trends that were just very apparent. And again, these 15 task force each basically produced a term paper and submitted that to the commission. The commission then had what amounts to be more than 400 pages of documentation to go through and look for these emerging trends. And some of them, I think, are quite well noted today across the United States. How important broadband is. Broadband, particularly in our rural communities, but I would point to also digital deserts in our urban areas, are key to e-commerce, key to telemedicine, and key to distance learning. And for the first time, many small businesses recognize that they never envisioned a day when they wouldn't have access to their customers and their clients, nor did they envision a day that their clients and customers would not have access to their products and services. So now seeing through a different lens how incredibly important that is, but supported by the broadband backbone. There's not a silver bullet for broadband and the solutions that are necessary in many of our communities, but rather a quilt of different programs that will get more emphasis, are getting more federal and state and local investment opportunities with those. Certainly our transportation systems for us in Louisiana, it extends beyond rail, road, and air, but also our support infrastructure systems recognized as critically important. Utility investments, certainly even some of the recent beyond the pandemic, just in weather events disrupting infrastructure. Now, even in some parts of the nation, seeing these high temps are causing some rolling brownouts. Certainly there is maybe some time frames where we've taken advantage of our utility opportunities, but then there's other times when we've overlooked the necessary elements to continue to invest in infrastructure. And finally, the one that you've touched on too, Jack, relative to global warming and the impacts that it's having, the need for water management, for restoration of coastlines, of shifting the carbon footprint into a direction of towards carbon zero. So now opportunities around the development of wind energy. Certainly we've been engaged in Louisiana in renewables, largely wood pellets and such for a long time, but seeing solar and other pathways to lower carbon footprints moving forward is becoming increasingly important.
Don, what are you going to increase resources for education, and also what you've identified healthcare and the health and well-being of people as one of the areas that urgently needs to be addressed. What kind of expansions of health programs are you thinking about?
Those are both good areas to quickly note. First of all, on the education front, we are very well focused right now on the importance of pre-K education as critical, and also a nice package that was also adopted recently by this legislative session that just ended. May sound a little awkward in some circumstances, but now it's a requirement to send your child to kindergarten. That was not a legal requirement previously in Louisiana, and we do lag in some of our early education and kindergarten kind of educations that prepare young people to enter school ready to learn. So if anyone there is in an area of this nation or state that doesn't value that, it certainly is critical. Back to where we need the healthcare investments, I think for a long time, corporate America has understood that preventative medicine is important. Head things off, annual physical, be aware of a lot of things. How do you implement that? Well, number one is making healthcare more accessible, can be in these lower cost programs provided by telehealth, where you can have a physical, you can have a consultation today through these methodologies. And basically, the other one thing that we would recognize in this short amount of time that we have to talk about this is the number one leading cause of death in America, and that's obesity. Somebody might respond that it's a heart attack or stroke or cancer, but all of those seem to have a foundation in obesity. And for those kinds of programs, and in our view, declaring war on obesity in Louisiana, we're leading with that right now through the Pennington Biomedical Research Foundation there in Baton Rouge. But those kinds of preventative medicine are low cost, easy to access programs that need to be emphasized and continued and brought about more robustly in the days to come.
Don, are you working with the large banks to increase the access of underserved communities to capital for small businesses and entrepreneurship?
Absolutely, and I'm really pleased to say that it's not just the large banks, but with a close working relationship with Louisiana Bankers Association, we were able to, during pandemic, put together a low documentation requirement, low interest loan program for small businesses. Certainly the SBA did a great job with the Economic Disaster Injury Loan Program and the PPP program, but we stepped out quickly to put this program in place in concert with our banks. We are now working with our banks on this next major initiative that's going to come down in all states across the U.S., but the Small Business Credit Initiative. I think our allocation in Louisiana is $74 million. We had an allocation from the U.S. Treasury during the bubble of the finance bubble that caused a collapse. Previously, they allocated $13 million to us. We put it to good use and demonstrated that. And so now we have an opportunity to take this $74 million allocation and get it out to small businesses through low interest loan programs, to do some entrepreneurial development opportunities, and perhaps even some investments in venture capital that we're excited about having that opportunity to push forward.
Well, Don, I wish we had more time to talk about this. We're going to send a copy of the comprehensive game plan for Louisiana's resilience to everyone who has attended this webinar, so they can really see all of the elements that you've proposed in there. This based on what we see in covering the universe of economic development organizations. This is a groundbreaking plan. It's a blueprint. I mean, everyone is focusing on economic development equity right now, and this is what the first comprehensive blueprint that we've seen. And the last question I'll ask you today is, do you think we're going to be able to seize the moment and build the momentum towards equity-driven growth and economic development, which is going to require a lot of significant changes in society?
Yeah, I don't even think it's optional. I think for two reasons that it's going to be the prevailing way of the successful companies and the successful economic development of the future. A, first of all, morally, it's the right thing to do. And B, from a business effectiveness point of view, for governments to optimize, it makes the most sense to take all of your available assets, which is your human resources and talents, and do a better job in education and healthcare. And with that, you're going to get this increased GDP, and those areas that are able to quickly embrace and rapidly respond to this are going to rise, and that'll be noted. You're going to note it in the rural areas, in the mid markets, and in the urban areas as well.
And the last thought I'll throw out there is based on what our first speaker presented to us in terms of the labor shortage and demographic drought, we're going to need to develop the talents of everybody and be totally inclusive in finding that talent and expanding the opportunities for everybody, or we're not going to have enough people to fill all the jobs that we're going to need to fill. So I agree with you that it's an imperative, and there's really no turning back. Don, I want to thank you for joining us today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I want to thank Josh Wright as well for a great presentation. We've given everyone a lot of things to think about here. I want to thank the audience for joining us, and wish everybody a good afternoon.
Thank you, Jack. Always a pleasure to be with you as well.
Take care. And that ends our webinar for today. And as I said before, you can access the webinar on the businessfacilities.com website. Thank you and good afternoon.